Today's documentary, Mapungubwe, Africa's Forgotten Golden Kingdom. Imagine a hill, a sandstone citadel rising from the flat, dry plains of southern Africa. For centuries, the local people knew it as a forbidden place, a hill of jackals. They called it Mapungubwe, the Hill of the Jackals. But in 1932, a group of local men led a curious farmer to its summit. What they found there would shatter everything the world thought it knew about African history. Scattered in the dirt, gleaming under the African sun, were artifacts of pure gold. A golden rhinoceros, coiled gold wire, beads of glass and gold, and the remains of a king seated on a royal stool, surrounded by treasure. This was not a random burial. This was a lost capital. This was the heart of a kingdom that had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers and gold. For over 700 years, the secrets of Mapungubwe lay buried, its story erased by time and shifting sands. We are in the Limpopo River Valley, a vast, sun-baked landscape where South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Botswana meet. Today, it is a place of baobab trees and elephant herds. But 1,000 years ago, this was the cradle of the first complex society in southern Africa. A kingdom with kings and commoners, with artisans and traders, connected to the farthest reaches of the ancient world. This is the story of Africa's forgotten golden city, a civilization that rose to dazzling heights only to mysteriously collapse. Our story begins not on the hill, but in the valley below. Around 900 AD, long before Mapungubwe's golden peak, the first settled communities began to form here. They were the ancestors of the Shona people, farmers and cattle herders who discovered the fertile potential of the Limpopo's floodplains. They lived in what is now known as the K2 site, a large village of clay and thatch. Life was good. The climate was kinder then, with more reliable rainfall. They cultivated sorghum and millet, raised massive herds of cattle, the ultimate symbol of wealth, and traded ivory and animal skins with communities along the coast. This was the foundation. But then, something changed. A social revolution was brewing. By around 1075 AD, a profound shift occurred. The people began to abandon the open valley and move to the top of the neighboring sandstone hill, Mapungubwe. This was not a casual move. It was a deliberate, symbolic act that would redefine their society forever. Building on that steep, 30-meter-high hill was an enormous undertaking. It required organization, leadership, and a collective will. And it created something entirely new in southern Africa, a sacred, segregated space for the elite. The commoners continued to live in the valley below, in an area now called the Southern Terrace. But the hilltop became the exclusive domain of the royalty and the elite. For the first time in this region, there was a clear, physical manifestation of class distinction. A king had emerged. The rise of this kingship was intimately tied to a new source of power and prestige, gold. The people of Mapungubwe had discovered the gold-bearing reefs of the region. But they weren't just mining raw ore, they were transforming it. Archaeologists have found crucibles and tuyères, clay pipes used to blow air into furnaces, proof of sophisticated metalworking. The goldsmiths of Mapungubwe were masters. They developed a technique to beat gold foil over a carved wooden core, creating lightweight but magnificent objects. Their most famous creation, discovered in that royal grave on the summit, is the golden rhinoceros. It is a masterpiece, about 15 centimeters long, formed from thin gold foil tacked with tiny pins around a wooden core. The rhino was a symbol of power and leadership, and this one was buried with a king. But Mapungubwe's influence did not stop at the edges of the Limpopo Valley. This kingdom was plugged into a global network. Excavations have yielded thousands of glass trade beads. Chemical analysis reveals their origins, some from Persia, some from India, and most significantly, Celadon pottery and beads from the Song dynasty in China. Imagine that. In the 12th century, a king on a hill in southern Africa was wearing beads that had traveled over 10,000 kilometers. Passing through the ports of Kilwa on the Swahili coast, carried by Arab and Indian dhows across the Indian Ocean. Mapungubwe was a vital inland terminus of the Indian Ocean trade. In return for gold and ivory, they received luxury goods that reinforced the status of the elite. The kingdom reached its zenith between 1200 and 1220 AD. The hilltop citadel was densely packed with clay-walled homes for the elite. The king's court would have been a spectacle of power. We can envision advisors, artisans, and warriors moving through the stone-walled passages. Down in the valley, the southern terrace housed over 5,000 commoners. The entire society was a complex, hierarchical machine. The wealth was staggering. One royal burial alone contained over 20,000 gold beads, along with the golden rhino and a scepter or staff covered in gold foil. This was a society that understood symbolism, that used material culture to project divine authority and unshakable power. They were the pioneers of a social order that would later define the great kingdom of Great Zimbabwe. Yet, at the very peak of its power, the foundations of Mapungubwe began to crumble. The first cracks were environmental. Core samples taken from nearby lakes and riverbeds tell a story of dramatic climate change. Around 1250 AD, the region was hit by a prolonged and severe drought. The once reliable rains failed. The Limpopo River, the artery of life, dwindled. The fertile floodplains shrank. For a society built on agriculture and massive cattle herds, this was a catastrophe. Grazing land disappeared. Crops withered in the fields. At the same time, the second pillar of their wealth began to tremble: trade. The Indian Ocean trade routes were not static. They were sensitive to political winds and economic currents. Evidence suggests that around this time, the focus of trade began to shift northwards. New powers were rising. New alliances were forming. The flow of those precious glass beads and Chinese ceramics that fortified the king's authority may have slowed to a trickle or been redirected. The elite of Mapungubwe faced a double disaster. Their spiritual and economic legitimacy was drying up along with their water sources. The social contract between the king and the people, based on his ability to provide prosperity and link them to the wider world, was breaking. We can only imagine the tension, the fear, and the difficult decisions that followed. The population likely declined due to famine and outmigration. And then, they made a momentous decision. Sometime around 1300 AD, the Hill of the Jackals was silently abandoned. It was not a sudden, violent exodus. There is no evidence of a great fire or an invasion. Instead, it appears to have been a deliberate, organized departure. The royal graves were left intact, though surely some treasures were taken. The houses were left to the elements. The people simply walked away from their golden citadel. Where did they go? The prevailing theory, supported by architectural and cultural evidence, points north. They likely migrated, taking their knowledge, their social structure, and their goldsmithing skills with them, to a new location with better water and closer access to shifting trade networks. That new location was Great Zimbabwe. The rise of Great Zimbabwe, beginning in the 13th century, mirrors the decline of Mapungubwe almost perfectly. The stone-building techniques, the social hierarchy, the focus on cattle and gold, the connection to Indian Ocean trade, all are refined echoes of the Mapungubwe model. The iconic soapstone birds of Great Zimbabwe find their precursor in the golden rhino of Mapungubwe. It seems the soul of the kingdom did not die. It transformed and relocated, giving birth to an even more famous empire. Mapungubwe was the prototype, the first experiment in statehood in southern Africa, and its people became the founders of a new chapter. For centuries, Mapungubwe slept. Its story was kept alive only in oral traditions that warned of a sacred, haunted hill. That changed in the 20th century, but its rediscovery is marred by controversy and racism. In 1932, the farmer and prospector, J. Van Graan, was taken to the site by local inhabitants who knew of its existence. The subsequent excavations were led by the University of Pretoria. But this was the era of apartheid. The white government could not accept that black Africans had created such an advanced civilization. For decades, the artifacts and the narrative were twisted. Some proposed that Mapungubwe was built by foreign, non-African peoples. The golden rhino and other treasures were hidden away in a university vault, and the true significance of the site was suppressed, a victim of political ideology. It was only after the fall of apartheid that Mapungubwe could reclaim its rightful place in history. In 2002, the Mapungubwe cultural landscape was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognized for its testimony to a pivotal stage in human history. The golden rhino was unveiled to the public as a symbol of pre-colonial African achievement. Today, The hill stands as a powerful reminder of resilience and fragility. Archaeologists continue to piece together its story, using soil analysis, satellite imagery, and careful excavation to understand the daily lives of its people, not just its kings. So why does this lost kingdom matter today? Mapungubwe forces us to rewrite history. It proves that complex societies, with wealth, art, and global connections, flourished in Africa long before European contact. It is a story of African innovation and agency. But it is also a cautionary tale of profound relevance. Mapungubwe fell, in large part, due to climate change. A shift in weather patterns destabilized its agriculture and strained its social fabric. As we face our own global climate crisis, Mapungubwe stands as a stark monument to the vulnerability of even the most sophisticated civilizations to environmental change. It teaches us about the interconnectedness of economy, ecology, and power. The wind whispers over the empty stone walls of Mapungubwe Hill. The golden rhino now sits in a museum, a silent ambassador from a forgotten age. But the legacy of this kingdom is everywhere. In the cultural traditions of the Shona people, in the architectural grandeur of Great Zimbabwe, and in the very understanding of Africa's deep and complex past. Mapungubwe was not a myth. It was a real, thriving, golden heart that beat for centuries in the Limpopo Valley. It was a first, a pioneer, a kingdom that reached for the sun, traded with the world, and then, facing an unforgiving new reality, made the painful choice to leave its gilded hill to the Jackals, moving on to write the next chapter in the epic story of a continent. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this documentary, please subscribe to our channel. We bring you fascinating documentaries on history, science, civilizations, mysteries, and the untold stories that shaped our world. Hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you never miss a new release. See you in the next one.